As we stand at the start of a new era shaped by AI, the question of how AI will transform the workforce looms large. Today, we're honored to host a panel discussion featuring two leading voices in the intersection of AI, law, and workforce dynamics. We will have Ifeoma Ajunwa, who is Asa Griggs Kendler Professor of Law, the founding director of the AI and Law program at Emory University School of Law, and author of the famous book, The Quantified Worker. Alongside her, we will have Liz Grennan, who is a partner and the global co-leader of digital trust at McKinsey. Our conversation, moderated by Karman Lucero, a China policy expert from the Tsai China Center at Yale Law School, will navigate the nuanced landscape of AI's impact on employment. We'll explore not just the potential of AI as a co-pilot in enhancing productivity, but also its role in reshaping employee firm dynamics, as well as the critical risk of displacement and the imperative of reskilling. We will talk about not only what may happen, but also what is happening now in the labor market. We will also touch upon the geopolitical implications of AI-driven shifts in global economics. Everyone, please welcome them.
Thank you. First, I just want to say it's a great honor to be here. This is such a cool event, and I'm really excited that I get to moderate this panel, not least of which because I'm joined by these two amazing experts. I really look forward to this conversation, and so we'll jump right in. So, of course, this whole event is about AI and responsible AI. This word AI, it incorporates a number of different technologies, but aside from those technologies, implicit in AI is a number of values. And sometimes those value choices or ideological choices are obfuscated by the use of the term AI. So just to kick off the conversation, what do the two of you think AI means, particularly when we're talking about a company's use of the phrase?
Wow, just cut right to the big questions, right? I guess I'll start by saying that AI is really a misnomer, right? Because it stands for artificial intelligence. And really when the term AI was conceived, it was really the idea that we would reach a point when machines would just be as intelligent, or if not more so, than human beings. We have not reached that time yet, and perhaps may never. So that's what makes AI a little bit of a misnomer. I would also say that AI is a catch-all. It's really a catch-all term used for automated decision-making of all kinds. And it's the idea that you can impute data into computerized processes, also known as algorithms. And there are different types of algorithms. There are simple algorithms, but there's also machine learning algorithms, and that you can then obtain a desired result, a target variable, an output. So really, I think the bottom line to remember about AI or artificial intelligence is that it's not so artificial, right? The human mind, the human hand remains present. It's the human who's deciding what's the appropriate model, meaning the sets of algorithms to use here. It's the human who's deciding what's the appropriate training data. It's the human who's deciding, is this output accurate in terms of what I'm looking for, or do I need to go back to the drawing board? So that's really my response to always think a little bit more critically about the term AI.
Thank you very much. And I think that applies to a number of dynamics and technologies that we see in the tech field, where a lot of them involve taking massive amounts of data from different sources and analyzing it to produce something else. And while there's a process, an algorithm, as you described, that produces that output, the output does not interpret itself.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
always a value, a valence, and a choice behind what the outputs mean.
Right.
I'll turn now to Liz. So you, of course, are familiar with multiple different businesses and the way that they're using AI. And so when these different businesses use AI, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think that the question is a great one. I think you can have an overly broad definition of AI just in the level of, you just ask yourself what level of abstraction is helpful. When you are de-risking AI or assessing AI or prioritizing AI, you have to ask yourself, well, what are you using it for? It's very practical. What problem are you trying to solve, and what do you use to solve it? Can you use Excel to solve it? Can you use two interns talking together to solve it? Can you use a napkin scribbled on? Or do you need traditional AI? Do you need Gen AI? And then once you have chosen how to solve the problem and the tech you're going to use to solve it, then you can start to assess, well, then you're talking about AI at a certain level of abstraction, and you have a certain set of parameters around it. There was a very helpful comment in an earlier panel about regulating AI, and you can't really just regulate AI. You can regulate uses of AI. You can regulate sectors, and our Joanne from MasterCard was saying that even data in the US is regulated by sector. So I think there is some disaggregation, probably practical on, I say use case level at work, but like the problem solving level. What problem are you trying to solve? And then you think about what problems are people trying to solve at scale with in the workplace? And then how, in the aggregate, how is that impacting job displacement? And there's all sorts of questions that you can ask once you understand the context in which you're discussing AI.
Thank you. That as a legal scholar that studies sort of comparative and transnational definitions of AI, I've definitely found that the specific context is key. There's no answer without that context. All right, so now jumping into AI and workforce in particular. Starting with Ifeoma, what are some of the ways that AI is coming into the workforce, and how is AI changing the relationship between employee and company?
I would say perhaps the most salient way that you see AI in employment is actually through AI in hiring, right? I think most businesses are preoccupied, rightfully so, with finding talent and ensuring that they are able to be competitive in finding the best talent out there. And so AI automated hiring systems are really quite popular, and they actually are of great interest to employers. But this is also where I think I would offer a word of caution, just in terms of the research that I've done, from my book. Not everything that labels itself as AI is AI, right? I think that's essentially what Liz was getting at. So when it comes to automated hiring, there are a lot of big claims that can be attached to it by the vendors. One of those claims especially is this idea that AI hiring somehow is going to remove the human bias from hiring, right? Because we all know that, when you do have hiring, you do encounter human bias. Like, human beings do have different biases. And the idea then that is promulgated, I think, by a lot of these vendors is that the switch to AI hiring is a way to get rid of that bias. And actually, I found the opposite to be true in my research. So with AI hiring, what you see is that actually bias can become baked into the system, and not just baked in, it can be replicated, magnified, and also obfuscated. It can become hidden, such that then it becomes actually more difficult to know that bias and to confront it and to redress it. So I do think that is a very important space that we need to be looking at for employment. I would also mention the use of wearables as a part of the workspace. So a lot of these wearables are collecting data in terms of worker productivity, worker movements. And, we might think, okay, that doesn't necessarily matter to us as perhaps, white collar workers that we see ourselves. But, some of that is actually transferring into our laptops or our phones. And this is all tracking productivity. And then finally, we see the rise of Gen AI, right? ChatGPT, infiltrating also the workplace. And what we see with ChatGPT, of course, is that it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you can see how ChatGPT could really streamline a lot of work processes and make work more efficient, remove some of the drudgery, so to speak. But on the other hand, you can also see the worry about how ChatGPT is perhaps speeding up automation and the displacement of workers. And then, of course, there's still the issue with accuracy when it comes to ChatGPT.
Thank you. This tied into your response to the first question about how AI is oftentimes not AI, or just obfuscates the fact that it's still people making decisions. And so when it comes to hiring, if companies or individuals are using AI-powered tools in the hiring, it's still human decision making, just sort of refracted through an algorithm or a series of processes that doesn't necessarily let us escape from the problems of a human making those decisions. Exactly. Thank you. Liz, if you don't mind answering the same question, how do you think AI is changing the relationship between employee and company? And please just sort of build on also your answer to the last question, where you emphasized how it's very important to know context in order to be able to understand how AI plays into how AI comes into play in any particular context.
Thanks, Karman. Ifeoma raised so many good issues. I want to talk about data and wearables. I will just ask a question of the audience. How many of you have a streak going with like Duolingo or an app or running?
I'm actually one of them.
I'm so proud of my Duolingo streak. Wearables are so great. And our track record of success, if it suits our personal narrative, is great. It's also alarming. And where I see a lot of exploration of use cases is quantification on various levels. Some are good and helpful. Maybe all of them are helpful in some way, diagnostically. But some are alarming from just a how are we want to live our lives way. And I say this by saying, you can quantify so much now. You can quantify like keystroke. You can quantify. I had someone explore a use case that said, should we track sort of colloquialisms and vernacular in the workplace setting to predict success in this setting? And as someone who once took I'm from San Diego, but I took a BuzzFeed quiz many years ago that said that my word choice suggests I'm from Yonkers, which I was like, no, I'm not from Yonkers. But I think things can get collected about us. Data can get built up. We all have data profiles that are being built as we speak, sitting here right now. The data is being recalibrated on each one of us. And I think that is both wonderful in terms of personalization journeys, a wonderful implication. It's also an alarming implication if everything we do, including microexpressions, gets measured and tracked. I just want to kind of cover my face when I think about that. But you can do analysis of microexpressions. You can do analysis of colloquialisms. You can do bad joke counts. And that, to me, becomes somewhere in the workplace that we want to be very careful from an ethical standpoint. I will answer, in the workplace, our research has shown the 4 best use cases for generative AI. We call it the 4 C's. Coding, concision, which is like virtual experts, and summarization, customer service, there's like the chat bots, and then creation, creating all the things we talked about, that incredibly sobering last session on disinformation. So when you think about these use cases, I think these are the areas where if you're looking for near-term impact in the workplace, at least McKinsey clients are all thinking about, these are the high-value use cases. And if you extrapolate, you say, am I in any of these areas? Does my job do these things? And how can I then think of, if we shift gears to say we are the workers that we're thinking about, how can I use AI as my co-pilot, so to speak, my tool, my enhancer? And I think that's, as we think through workplace impact going forward, and we think about ourselves, we think, how can I use and teach others to use AI to enhance what we do, higher, better, more strategic, rather than simply just we will all be replaced. So there's a lot of ethical concerns that come into this. I do want to speak, but I'll go back to it. There's something really, really rich to be said about the data sources and what's in them and what's not in them, but we can get to that in a bit.
Yes, no, thank you. That was a very illuminating answer. I'm going to have to remember the 4 C's because that's very insightful. And they give me hope, not just because it's a helpful way to remember some particular use cases, but it demonstrates the extent to which this is very much humans deciding our own values and choosing what is the best use of these technologies. And you also, I think, quite concisely described the downside. And while, a BuzzFeed quiz incorrectly saying that you speak as if you're from Yonkers is relatively innocuous.
Yeah, no problem.
The ways in which these systems can be wrong in other contexts can be much more harmful.
Well, this is the thing. I will also publicly say I have celiac disease. If it is determined because of some sort of predictive analytics that those with celiac disease are more likely to have early dementia, whatever it is, or if you have a certain gait when you run and your wearable catches it, and for some reason that is linked with early onset cancer, this goes into training data that impacts decision making, outcomes, sort of interpretations of data. And even if you take your training data out of the set, you still have the algorithmic shadow, as it's called. You can't undo it unless you destroy the model. And there are cases of algorithmic disgorgement when you use data that is tainted. I won't mention names, but if you use children's data and you weren't meant to, you have to get rid of the entire model, and that's very expensive, and so it's worth thinking through the data collection and data content. But I think we should all think too about how data can be misused, and the competitors of today are not the competitors of tomorrow. So if you think about even just data leakage, no one knows what's going to happen in the future. So just when you think through data implications, it's a very wide circle, and it's hard to get your head around all the different places that could go. So I will go back to regulation. It will have to be very targeted because we're all sort of swimming in these waters. So
I mean, just to pick up on that, I really love that you're honing in on this issue of data. Because I think a lot of times when people think about AI, they think algorithms, right? And actually a big part of how AI systems work is data. The training data specifically is perhaps the most important part.
It's most important.
And so, a paper that a co-author and I are working on is this idea of provenance. Mm-hmm. And, we are perhaps familiar with the idea of provenance when it comes to art, or even when it comes to food stuff, right? We want to know, where is this food coming from? And of course, we make value judgments, right? Knowing where the food comes from, right? Only wine from Champagne in France can be called Champagne for a specific reason. And same with art. We're going to make value judgments about an art, piece that's from Monet versus some unknown artist. So when it comes to data provenance, or actually just provenance in general, it's this idea that we really want to think about how the data was obtained, what was missing when the data was being obtained, were there any biases that perhaps tainted the data collection, or even just the conception of what is data and to be collected. And then we also want to think about even fitness for purpose. So the context that you mentioned. Not all data is fit for any use, right? So we actually want to have that sort of critical examination of where was this data obtained? Is this suitable for what I'm trying to do with it? Or do I actually need to find other data? Do I maybe want to even repair this data before I feed it into my model, knowing that, there's potential for, a bit of a skew there. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do think, in my book, I make this joke, more data, more problems. Because I think in the business world, there's this give me data. There's this appetite for data. And, I think a lot of companies don't know what to do with data. They don't understand the limitations of data, and they also don't understand the full potential of data. And I think, in as much as we say, we need to learn how to make we need to learn how to work with Gen AI. That's like the new sort of training for workers. I actually think data science remains still a very important skill for business leaders to know, just to understand, the importance and limitations of data.
Yeah, thank you. And as with the 4 C's before, I see a silver lining in this more data, more problems dynamic, where it raises a lot of complex questions, but it does, again, seem that at the end of the day, it takes a level of human innovation, of choice, to determine what the right answer is.
Right, and just to jump on the human innovation part, there is also this, I think, catch term, human in the loop. I'm sure you've all heard it, right? When it comes to AI, it's like, oh, we need a human in the loop. We need a new human in the loop. Well, I would say we actually have it wrong by saying that. Because when you imagine human in the loop, you're imagining that the human is just like one step of the process, right? You're imagining the human at a static, fixed point in the loop. And that's just wrong. We actually want to think about human at the helm. So the process is not just going and a human just comes in and says, oh, looks okay, stamp, and goes on. You want to think about a human is at the helm. A human is still following everything that's happening, right? From the training data to the specification of the model, which is all the algorithms, right? To the interpretation of the results. You want a human following all of that to ensure that everything is working properly. So we need a human at the helm, not just in the loop.
Yeah, no, that makes a great deal of sense. I think at the heart of a lot of these discussions and debates about AI is the extent to which AI will sort of turn us into machines.
Right.
Versus the extent to which it will enhance our agency.
Exactly.
And of course, the latter is the ideal outcome, and this human at the helm, I think, really helps clarify what that looks like.
Exactly.
So thank you. Okay, so we'll turn next to another very big topic when it comes to AI and workforce, and that's the issue of unemployment. So one of the narratives is AI might cause mass unemployment and a lot of social problems. And so I'm just going to throw that on the table, and if I could just get your quick take on that dynamic.
I mean, it's not even a take, it's current. There are numbers that are current. There are organizations trying to figure out how to navigate. Thinking about, I'm a lawyer by training. I've spent 20 years being a lawyer. The stated purpose for a Delaware for-profit corporation, so like most corporations, is to make money for, like, return on investment for its shareholders. Thus, the corporate machine is going to be saying, how can I reduce spending? How can I do more with less? How can I, optimize whatever processes? And there are values that they are pursuing, and it's all done in a set of corporate values and ethics. But we should assume that if you can do it and it is lawful and it doesn't contradict ethics that they hold dear, corporations are going to look to see where they can turn pyramids into columns. Where can they automate tasks? Where can they make something more, quickly, more in a more personalized way? So let's all assume that capitalism is in full swing and we are going to experience a radical shift. We will experience a radical shift. We are currently experiencing shifts, and our clients are all looking, how do we use this? It's so exciting. How do we use this to do things better? So I don't think we should pretend this is a future problem. It's a now problem, but where is it going? And I think the question becomes, and I've seen McKinsey's got some statistics, World Economic Forum had a whole range of statistics around how many jobs we'll lose, but how many new jobs will come in. And from their 2020 predictions, pre-Gen AI, there were more jobs coming in than lost. It's just sort of a turnover of types in the way we saw with COVID. We saw, millions of jobs from food service obviously went in a very different direction during COVID. But I think we have to ask ourselves, where do we want it to go? And without intervention, there will be a very, very big divide between those who don't know to reskill, don't know how to reskill, don't know where to go to get reskilled, and those who are able to bridge that sort of ride out this new inflection point and become the data scientists of the future. So I love your take on where should regulation go. I can't speak to it, but where should it go given we will have a very material problem very soon with needing to redo and renew our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a question that I tackle a little bit in the book. I mean, the book was really focused on really bringing to light all the different ways that American workers are being quantified, essentially reduced to numbers, right, in the workplace through AI technologies. But of course, what is the point of all this quantification? The point of all this quantification actually goes back to Taylorism. So Taylorism was focused on let's understand the job like on a very minute level such that we can make it as efficient as possible for the worker to do that job. And it was this idea actually of de-skilling in a lot of ways, meaning that we want to know the job so well that we can teach it to any worker. You wouldn't need to have any kind of special skill to be able to do the job. Now, with the quantification that's happening in the workplace, it's really, we want to know the job and how humans do it so well that we can what? Teach it to robots, teach it to machines. That's what's happening, right? And so for me, from a regulatory point of view, one of my suggestions is if we are essentially using humans, right, as the data subjects for automation, right? So I call it, I call it actually captured capital. We're capturing all this data from workers in the workplace. It's captured capital. We need to actually reinvest that capital back into workers. And we do that through upskilling. So allowing workers to gain skills that will then allow them to be humans at the helm, or reskilling, right? Encouraging workers to learn other skills that are still very difficult for machines to do. But it does require, right, governmental action to sort of nudge, right, whether through like tax breaks and things like that, this sort of movement of returning some of the captured capital back to the workers, right? Because otherwise what we're looking at is a mass layoffs, right? And because of automation, and then we might have to move to, something that maybe people are not as comfortable with, which is the universal basic income, right? We would then have to start thinking about UBI, and I think a lot of, some people are not comfortable with that, but I do think if they think about the fact that workers are providing the capital for automation, then it just seems fair, it seems ethical to reinvest some of that capital into reskilling and upskilling workers.
Can I speak? Because all three of us are legal backgrounds. I think it's the Goldman Sachs report. Of all the people that are going to get replaced, it's like consultants and lawyers. It's like the knowledge population. And I think Goldman's, their prediction was 44% of legal tasks will be automated. Now that, because I do serve a lot of law firms and corporate legal departments, I would say there is, just speaking very generally, there is some kind of head in the sand moments right now because it's just such a radical shift in like leverage models and income streams that I think folks are not there yet. But what I would hope that we'd all think is with reskilling, I'll use this analogy. If I've heard teachers say, oh no, our kids are just going to cheat. And it's very reductionistic to say, like, oh no, ChatGPT means they're going to cheat on everything. Instead of saying, well, okay, now you can create self-tutors. Now there's very personalized learning. Now there is, a whole new ability to test problem-solving skills. And for my colleagues in the room who put on this event, who are going to McKinsey, I challenge you to, good job, Jack. I challenge you to think through how do you use whatever's available to you to solve a problem. And so this becomes problem-solving skills. So the upskilling becomes how do you do things higher, better, what's more strategic, what is more interesting to do. And this is maybe that capital reinvested to say, okay, well, let's use it at its highest end to think, what are things, products and solutions we never dreamed of delivering? And now we can. And have you guys just marveled at Sora? I am marveling at Sora. I think it's going to be fascinating. And I heard one statistic that wasn't a statistic, it was just a prediction that we will all have our own personalized background music that could like follow us everywhere. Can you imagine? If you're just walking down and you had like, Ifeoma music and Karman music. That's the personalization of our own entertainment and the videos that we create. So there's lots in the future. I think it's raising our own ambitions about what can we do and what can we create and how can we get our own skills and other skills to produce these incredible ambitions that we've increased, and that's very exciting. It's much more an exciting conversation than like how many people will be left without a job because our current processes get automated.
Awesome. Well, I would love to continue this conversation all night, but at this time, I'd like to turn it to audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Yes.
So I have a question regarding AI and company culture. So like this morning, a lot of the people talk about they try to build the AI to be used by the company so that the company can use their proprietary data to train the AI. So along that path, I think it's going to be a lot of companies' culture and philosophy being built into the AI system itself. So my question is that then some company along the way, there will be a new leader come into the organization that may have a totally different take on what the company believes should be, culture should be. And in that scenario, you have a situation where the internal AI being trained using the past philosophy. So there's a case of evolution versus revolution. Right. And I just wondering, how do you think about this issue in the context of company culture being built into the AI? Right. So that's.
I'm happy to. Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I think it really pinpoints sort of a hidden issue with AI, which is the fact that AI, as we call it, is really a prediction machine. So it's supposed to be forward-looking, but in reality, it's actually backwards-looking. So, and I say that because it makes its predictions using past data. So that's kind of an inherent sort of tension within AI. And what you're pinpointing, right, is the fact that creating an AI for a company is in a lot of ways freezing that company in place. You're freezing that company at a certain point in time. You're calcifying specific ideas from that moment. And that's a little bit problematic because you do want your company to be dynamic. You want your company to be able to evolve with the times. So I think what it means is that business leaders have to be mindful of this effect when they are introducing AI. And a lot of ways to be mindful of this effect is actually to be paying attention to your training data. So I'll give you a solid example of this. One company, I talk about this story in the book, was trying to put a hiring system, AI hiring system, and they hired a lawyer. So we're still useful after all, to do an audit, right? They hired a lawyer to do an audit of the system. And they said, basically, here's our training data, right? There's resumes from our company. Can you audit our system and basically tell us what would be the two main factors that this AI system will extract from our training data as being the most important factors? And do you know what happened? Those factors were that the person was named Jared and that they had played high school lacrosse.
That's amazing.
Right? This is a real case. So what is that telling you, right? This is telling you that the AI system, even though obviously the company was trying to remove human bias, right, was trying to be forward-looking, had looked at their past decisions and said, these are the types of people you keep picking over and over, and I'm going to give you more of those types of people. So it's still like looking backwards. So that is something that business leaders need to be cognizant of, in that, relying on outdated training data, even when you're incorporating AI systems, is not going to let your company be dynamic.
I might just answer it with a slightly different. I agree with everything you said, and that's hilarious about the Jareds. But when I think about, we're talking about quantification and what data you can collect, there's a movement. I don't know if we're there yet, but folks want to create indexes and scores, and there's a new AI bank index that's very compelling. I think that you're going to start seeing scores for companies on their innovation score, like how much are they using these new technologies for the consumer's good. And I think you're also going to see in tandem, appropriately so, trust scores. And I do a lot of work with companies to say, our research has shown that it's not autonomy that the data subjects want. They don't want control over how their data is used. They do on paper, and they do maybe but in actuality, what they want is to know that the company's just taking care of it. They want to know that it's being handled, shepherded, stewarded well. So this is something where I think companies that think about their principles have to think of risk from am I innovative enough? Am I ambitious enough? Also, am I trustworthy enough? And to start understanding that people are going to take data points, because you can now do this, and measure them by these data points. And they'll have to start thinking about their own reputations being built on all sorts of facets of scoring. And I agree completely, too, that the trust score would go radically down if they did not think of data being inherently biased, all models being inherently biased, and having to test and assume that the backward-looking data is representative of where you want to go. So the one study that I want to make sure that we mention, in Nature magazine a few years back, about the data around who needs medical care and how much do they need. Did you read this study? It's crazy. The data suggested that people of color needed less medical care. I will just give you 5 seconds to think about why that might be the case. Because the data suggested they were underserved, but they didn't conclude this. They said, oh, more resilient. Great. It's such a problem. And we have this going on with women in the workplace. If lawyers from San Diego who talk like they're from Yonkers aren't predicted to do well in McKinsey settings, what am I to do? I hope that someone in recruiting is saying, well, that's just faulty training data or spurious connections. So that's where we hope that companies are saying, with their principles, with their ethics, with their approach to innovation, there are constraints. And we should use it and dive really into this innovation, but we should also know what constraints we're working against. And it's not the case that if you played lacrosse, you'll be incredibly successful at problem solving. Maybe, but maybe not.
The Jared example reminds me of an anecdote I heard in China where people will add a bunch of extra stuff on their resume, but in the same color as the background. Right. So if a human reads it, they'll just see the regular stuff, but then my name is Jared, and then the name. So
AI hiring vendors know about that trick, and so it doesn't work anymore. Okay. But yes, it used to be a thing. Yes.
There is a cat and mouse dynamic.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Another question, please. Yes. Well, why don't we take both questions, and then we're almost out of time, so we'll take both questions and then respond to both.
Perfect. Yeah.
Hi. So regarding AI in the workforce, I'm a teaching assistant for a class right now, and I suspect I don't have any proof, and I've seen it in my undergrad career too. Just like in my undergrad there wasn't a ChatGPT. Just this concern I have, just people using ChatGPT to maybe it facilitates them. ChatGPT or any generative AI to help them with their homework assignment and to help to assist them with their tasks. Well, it sort of masks up the fact that they might not be optimally skilled in those set tasks. So so when you look at resumes and they've done, they say, they've published these papers or done such researches, but in truth, they all did it with the help of ChatGPT and generative AI like that. By the time they come in, you realize they're not as skilled as their resumes might make them seem like, because they rely on ChatGPT all the time. So so would that be a concern when it comes to hiring people? Is there any way to check on how much they rely on Gen AI for their work?
I might answer very briefly to say there will be new ways of assessing skill in interviews, in the same way that you can test differently now. There'll be methods of casing, you just test it in the real time. So I think your question may go to screening of algorithms, or screening resumes rather, and how do you get through the stack, but you may have thoughts on this. But I think problem solving can be tested in a variety of ways.
Yeah, well, let's get to the next question and then I'll respond.
Thank you very much. My question is more boiled down to AI seems more suited for tasks that are in white-collar workforces versus the blue-collar workforce that we've reductionist managed down to here's your simple task, you do your one thing, and that level of efficiency has been gained. So just wondered on your thinking of how this evolution will affect white-collar workers versus blue-collar workers in society at large.
So yeah, I'm happy to tackle that. So I actually found that AI does not respect any one field. So it's pervasive. So it's going to affect blue collar workers, white collar workers, and I think actually in some ways white collar workers might seem more at risk just because of ChatGPT sort of being in the headlines. But what you're not necessarily always seeing in the headlines is that, for example, Amazon has a patent on a cage for workers. I hope I don't get sued for this, but you can search the patent. And why? Why do you think? Because it's actually at least the patent is saying this is to keep workers safe. And then you ask yourself, safe from what? It's actually so blue collar workers can work in tandem with big robots. It's everywhere, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Some are, I think, more eye-catching, ChatGPT, which obviously impacts more white-collar workers, but likewise, blue-collar workers will also be impacted. To the question about hiring, I think, there is anxiety, right, in terms of anybody can use ChatGPT and pretend to be more knowledgeable than they really are on any subject. How does this affect hiring? Because we want, hiring to be meritocratic, right? We want to hire the best worker. And I think, with anything, employers will evolve, right? Liz was saying, new methods of testing. A lot of actually companies are doing interviewing that's more about testing for the skills that you will actually be doing on the job. So rather than just looking at your resume and seeing you were, valedictorian, okay, great, but can you do the specific jobs, right, for which you're being hiring, right? And that involves, and this is actually part of automated hiring too. They can have you do games, right, as part of the application that's actually you doing the tasks that you would be doing on the job. So I think for me, that's actually a more appropriate way to be hiring now, because it is about finding the person who is skilled to do that job, and also kind of cuts down on issues of bias in terms of where you went to school, et cetera.
Thank you. So since we're out of school, the last thing I'll say is just when it comes to I get the temptation as an educator and former student to use ChatGPT for essays and stuff, but writing, as much as it sucks, is also thinking. And if you're cheating yourself out of thinking, the consequences of that will play out at some point.
Good PSA.
Cool. Well, thank you so much to Ifeoma and Liz for your expert comments, and thank you all of you for joining us.
Thank you all. Oh.